accuracy of the minutes or the action log. If there are no objections, I will take the minutes as approved and the action log as noted. And I see no objections, so we will do that shortly. The next item on the agenda is the forward plan. Are there any questions or comments that we need to take on the forward plan? I don't see any questions or comments, so we will assume that that is also accepted and move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 5, improving efficiency and effectiveness of the adult education budget. And I think that's Jackie. Thank you. Welcome, Jackie.
Good morning, everyone. And we've already said good morning because you had informal, but I will say that again. So the paper I'm bringing today is aligned to some of the recommendations of the 3-year adult education budget evaluation, which was reported to committee in January. It's also in response to clear feedback and advice from legal and procurement colleagues about the way we organise ourselves around procurement related to the devolved adult education budget. And it's also in part to some of my observations in this role. You may remember that I'm in role for about 6 months and probably 3 months actually actively in the role. So the premise of the paper is to propose a number of actions that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the way we utilise the fund. It's organised around 4 themes: a more agile approach to commissioning, a flexible innovation fund, a community learning review, and the impact of the new funding rates being introduced by the ESFA in 24-25, which as a devolved area we have some flexibilities around, but based on the way that we work around the ILR, we need to adopt some of those, and I'd like to just give you a bit of information about that to note. So with the commissioning area, we propose to manage in-year growth and underperformance through more agile commissioning and the introduction of a dynamic purchasing system. You may remember that this was brought to the Skills Committee in January of 2023 and gave information about what a dynamic purchasing system might entail for the combined authority. Due to the time available, the proposal is that we will use a DPS run by the Crown Commercial Services to perform our procurement for this year and then move to our own dynamic purchasing system in parallel. It'll allow us to respond to the market and address any underspending funds, allocating elements of the Innovation Fund money and where appropriate through running mini competitions, which will enable us to respond to demand more speedily. It'll take us away from the rigid lots that were procured in 2022. The contracts that were entered into via that procurement activity will remain in place. However, providers will be free to enter into additional contracts via the DPS if they remain within the financial limits and procurement rules. As you understand, inevitably providers drop off from our provider base through underperformance or lack of ability to engage with the skills sector that they felt that they were able to engage with at the beginning of the procurement. And because this is a procurement that lasts for 5 years, inevitably skills demand changes, and therefore we need to be able to be more active in procuring that need. So the proposal is that we would move to the committee would approve the in-year amendments for existing providers, which include growth requests for high-performing providers and reprofiling of the funding where providers have underperformed, and also to establish a flexible innovation fund, allowing us to respond to regional activities that underpin the priorities identified within the employment and skills strategy. So that brings me on to the Innovation Fund, which you will remember is a top slice of £500,000 from the main EB annually. And there's currently an additional £400,000 available, which will be repurposed from projects which were approved last year, but for a number of reasons did not get off the ground. The fund is an opportunity to test out new ideas, but ideas don't tend to happen once a year. So we're seeking to be able to move from an annual list of provision that makes up the total amount of the allocation to work on a number of themes as well as address new ideas as they emerge. Spend will be restricted to the overall amount available, and we will bring information to committee as the projects develop, producing final reports on the documents of the various activities of the annual performance review. Examples of the types of projects we are investigating currently include a community learning review, which comes up a little later in my report, taking the sector talent pipelines work forward as proposed by Claire at the last meeting, and training support for businesses in relation to the adoption of the Good Work Charter, which you heard about earlier in informal committee. And thinking about skills planning partnerships in our sub-regions to enable us to work with our provider base on planning a curriculum that relates specifically to the region, the sub-region that they are serving, and also engaging wider stakeholders to make sure that the understanding of demand in those sub-regions is clear. So moving on to the community learning review, since the beginning of devolution in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, community learning has been on a journey. You'll remember spend in 2019-20 was just under 1 million, and it's risen to just under 2 million in 21-22. This was intentional, with a focus on technical skills at the beginning of devolution, including a move away from funded leisure learning, which made up the majority of the funding. In the past 2 years, a strategic decision was made to increase the share of funding for community learning to 20% of the total adult education budget, to address learning needs that are not necessarily served by more formal learning, and in relation to the mayoral priorities around health and well-being, because we know that community learning supports people's confidence, it supports people to engage in learning that then moves on to potential engagement with further learning, employment. And the priorities for this increased fund were included increasing participation through engagement activities, preparation for work, preparation for further learning, intergenerational learning through family learning, and support with health and well-being. So we're now in a position where we've increased the investment in community learning activities and we started to increase participation, but it's not just about numbers. If the activities are going to make a real difference to people's lives and really reach into those communities where there's more need, it may be that the individual cost is greater, meaning that fewer people are supported, but that they benefit in more significant ways. It's fair to say that we don't have a model for understanding those outcomes, so we've commissioned research to assess what's out there nationally and to develop a combined authority outcomes framework. This will be piloted in community learning to start with, but there's an argument for this to be rolled out to the entirety of our skills provision in the future to inform our understanding of the impact of the funding. Initial findings will be reported on the 8th of March, and I think it would be really helpful to bring those findings to a future skills committee. The final element of the report is to inform the committee about upcoming funding rates. These changes are being implemented by the SFA as a result of the funding and accountability consultation undertaken by the Department for Education in the past few years. Essentially, the new rates will be based on guided learning hours rather than the previous formula-funded model. We've done some analysis internally to understand the impact on the learning aims that are delivered within the CPCA. Whilst the overall cost of what we delivered last year will be higher, there are individual learning aims and subject sector areas that would either decrease in funding or remain the same. As this process is essentially designed to support the sustainability of our learning organisations, and the current earnings boost, which is in place, will be removed in 24-25, we propose the approach where if there is a decrease in the current rate, we will increase it by a maximum of 10%, depending on whether it meets our priorities. We're in the process of doing final analysis of the data in consultation with our learning organisations, and I can report in a future paper about the impact that that has on allocations going forward. The most significant impact of the changes, which I think is important to note, is the number of learning aims, and therefore the number of people that we can support by adult education budget funding will inevitably reduce over the next few years by nature of our fixed settlement of funding with the DFE. Obviously, as we spend more of our allocation and we are able to have those conversations with the DFE going forward about the nature of that settlement, we will probably be in a stronger position to argue for more funding. So that's the essence of my report. And this is my first committee meeting, so I'm not quite sure whether I have to ask for approval or whether it's written in the notes. So you may need to guide me on that.
Thank you very much indeed, Jackie. There was a lot in there.
Yes.
I'm sure there will be some questions for members, and then we will make decisions. We will come to the recommendations at the end. Yes, I can see lots of hands up, and Sam is first, and then Eileen.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of content, and I've got a lot of questions, I'm afraid. So if I've got too many, please stop me, and then I can come back. But in terms of the first point on sort of the agile commissioning, I just had a question around how often the pre-selected supplier base is likely to be refreshed, or whether it'll be the sort of thing that is continually updated just as more and more suppliers fill in the...
Sam, do you want to, if you've got lots of questions, do you want to do kind of 3 and 3 rather than asking one at a time, because otherwise it will take a very long time?
And then just on another point, just to clarify how the governance of this works, do you need to then come to the skills committee to approve variations for particular providers in year, or can that be done outside? Because it seems like that would be an unnecessary hurdle for reasonably small variations that we'd probably want to avoid. In terms of the community learning review, my question for that one was just, when we're talking about an outcomes framework, obviously there's, I think, measuring the outcomes from community learning versus formal qualification routes are very different. Do we therefore need different outcomes metrics for those, or are we confident we can use the same ones?
Okay, so taking the first question, which was, can you just remind me?
How often providers?
Yeah, that's continuous. So providers can access on an ad hoc basis. And the governance, so variations in year, now we wouldn't need, that's the reason really for asking, because in the past we've brought very fixed reports with fixed amounts, and that's then made it very difficult for us to move away from those amounts without having to come back to committee. And as you can imagine, an academic year is very challenging, so we need to be able to respond swiftly to those things. And in terms with the community learning review, the metrics are not yet identified, but they are things like preparation for work, preparation for future learning, but also things around health and well-being, about engagement in civic society, etc. So they're relevant to all learning actually, but it's really, I've had the draft report actually of the research that we've done, and there's some really interesting concepts being developed, and then we'll move into phase 2 where we then implement the pilot.
Thank you. How many more have you got, Sam? 2, fine.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, be interesting to see some more detail about those metrics actually, because I can't quite get my head around how we can measure a lot of those things. It'll be quite useful. I wanted to talk a bit about the ESFA funding rate changes, and just I wondered if you first of all know anything about the rationale behind why the changes that will result in us funding less people essentially are coming in. What the rationale is behind the change to, I think, guided learning hours. And this may be a question more for elected members, but I don't know if we have a position on those changes in terms of what they're doing in reducing our ability to fund the number of people that we do. Is it the case that providers are generally asking for more funding per learner, or is it something that's kind of being just pushed down from government that isn't necessary in their view? And if it is a problem, is there any mechanism for us to avoid it by reducing our reliance on the individual learner records, or is that something that we absolutely can't get away from?
Okay, so taking the first question around the rates, the rationale came from consultation with the sector. Essentially, it's about having a sustainable provider base, I believe, fundamentally. I think it's well recorded that funding has not changed for many years in this sector, and so it will support our provider base to and we've got other ways that we want to do this by, supporting people to grow, etc., in certain areas. But I think it's essentially around needing to spend more on this funding because it's not enough. And then a position on the changes, I think I could probably open to the wider committee.
Thank you very much, Jackie. That's really helpful. I think on the position on the changes, I don't think that's something that we could determine now. I will just say that given what Jackie said about the response, that's in response to a clear perception from providers that the previous rates were not sustainable. I think that probably is something that we need to pay sufficient attention to, and it is clear from other sectors, such as childcare, that if you continue to have a rate which is below the level at which a provider can provide something sustainably, you do not grow the market. So I think I had Eileen next and then Sam.
I've got a couple of questions as well. So I'll do 3 questions, the same as Sam. So my first question is, how much do we know about the criteria that is being used to determine the allocation of funding? And what does the combined authority need to do to improve the allocation? I was looking at the stats for the learning providers, and many of them seem to be outside the CPCA area. And do we know why this is? Is there a lack of providers within the area, or are the providers in areas that are perhaps more deprived than the CPCA area? I just want to understand why so many of them are outside the area. Also, 61% had 10 or fewer learners from the CPCA area. If the learners are not within the CPCA area, does this have an impact on the benefits to the employers in the area? Does this mean that they're not getting the people who are being trained up to be more skilled, and they're going elsewhere? So that's my initial questions.
Okay, I'll take them in reverse order. So I think, Councillor Wilson, the slide that you're referring to about learning providers was pre-devolution. And so that has now been addressed, and now the providers that are contracted within the CPCA area, most of them are within the area. So, yeah. And in terms of the allocation of funding, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering questions at the moment. Could you repeat your first question?
How much do we know about the criteria that they use to provide the funding, the allocation?
So we'll use the existing commissioning statement, but it's quite timely because Claire and myself and the team are working this afternoon on additions to the commissioning statement, which are based on, the new demand. It was mentioned earlier in informal committee about things coming on board, and working on an approach to the sector talent pipelines work that we want to bring in, and thinking about more of a holistic approach around our general priorities, rather than having very fixed, we will spend £50,000 on this, and then not being able to alter that going forward. But we will bring that commissioning statement to the committee.
Thank you, Jackie. Fantastic. Sorry, Eileen, go on.
Oh, it's me.
This is just for information. South Cambs Council last week we passed a motion to treat care leavers as a protected characteristic, so that they actually are treated well as a protected characteristic, so that their needs, there's more understanding of their actual needs. And I see that the care leavers bursary. I was just wondering whether those that would be taken into account, that they do have particular needs when accessing education and well, all sorts of things, housing benefits. And my next question was, how far in advance of the local community learning teams setting up their timetables is funding announced, so that they can advertise the provision in advance to attract the learners?
Okay, so again in reverse order. So the funding is announced annually around June. Although if you remember, we've got 2-year allocations for our grant providers, and they are all of our community learning providers are within that grant provider community. So the funding has been known for 2 years in this instance. And with care leavers, we do have a bursary for care leavers, which is available. It is underused, and it's something that I'm focusing on as a priority, to think about whether we've got it right. So, you know, I can update on that at a future date.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Just for your information, Eileen, I think the Combined Authority has the same rule about treating care as a protected characteristic.
It was passed about, I think, 4 months ago.
Yep. Sam.
Thank you. I'm going to try and keep this to 2. One of which is just to flag on the community learning section. The increased investment in that area is really welcome, especially the work to ensure the funding reaches the most disadvantaged communities and hardest to reach groups. So best of luck in progressing that. And like other Sam, Councillor Carling, I'll look forward to understanding a bit more around the sort of outcomes metrics and how we're evidencing the value of that. But intuitively, I'm sure we're all confident it's the right direction to be moving in. Other area I wanted to pick up was on the Innovation Fund in Section 3. So creating a mechanism for piloting new approaches more dynamically to help us use the money better to support other work sounds very helpful. I just wonder, will we have opportunity at district and city level to input into pilots that are being planned in our districts, because we've got a local understanding that may complement what you've got in CPCA teams around key sectors and the challenges. And I know there was the suggestion of supporting what was the phrase, other community groups. Or similar. I just wanted to clarify whether our own district and city councils would be potential recipients of some of this funding in order to help deliver pilot work as well, or if you were seeking to target it sort of outside the direct public space for some reason.
Okay, so the opportunity for districts and city level input, I think we'll address through the ESOL plan, through the skills planning partnerships. I would hope that we'd have local membership of our political members, as well as our officers from the districts and town councils on those planning partnerships, and therefore that intelligence can be fed in at that sub-regional level. Second question, I'm really sorry. Okay.
Sorry, it was a suggestion in 3.5 that the money could be aimed towards learning and other local organisations. Was that
intended to exclude local councils, or was that just an example? So could we be funding, for example, our district council to try and take forward one of the approaches of which we have a couple of suggestions we can make offline?
Yes, that is appropriate. At the moment, we're funding East Cambs District Council with a citizens hub. So yeah, that's perfectly appropriate, and I'd be very pleased to hear your thoughts and proposals.
Thank you. James, and then Nick.
What I'd like to know is, within Fenland and East Cambs, we seem to have problems in recruiting people to come on to our learning schemes. And I just wonder whether or not we've had a look at how successful the providers are of these schemes outside our larger area. I just wanted to know, are we using the people who can really bring people in and get them on board? Because it seems to me, at least in Fenland and East Cambs, that we are failing to bring the numbers on board.
So as part of the Community Learning Review, one of the activities I'd like to do is to have a really in-depth look at the barriers to engagement. I've been in this sector for over 25 years, and it's a common theme that there is plenty of provision in certain areas, but there's a sort of stubborn reluctance to engage. So I think it would be really wise to have a really in-depth analysis and talking to people about the reasons why they don't engage, and that will be part of that second phase of the Community Learning Review.
Thank you, Jackie. That's very, very good news. I'd be extremely supportive of that. Nick.
I'm not going to really ask a question. It's more of an observation. So Jackie Seeley, I just wanted to fly the flag for the event I went along to for the WEA, Workers' Educational Associations, last week. They absolutely seem to be doing exactly what you say, going into areas and working across the patch to reach some of the people who are the most difficult. I came away inspired. I'm absolutely delighted, like people have mentioned around the table, how we have, in the Combined Authority, have re-looked at community learning as a resource. I was keen to understand, so there's a bit of a question. We're now at 20%. Where was it, 2.5 years ago, if that's possible? And I'm also keen to understand, even before you talked about the transition of the Combined Authority. I mean, actually, how much was in community learning and how much has been lost, and we're now turning the corner. I never had to rely on community learning, but it's quite clear that this is a resource when you can get into these areas. It makes a real change to people's lives, which leads me to my final comment. We must, and if indeed can I insist from a mayoral point of view, this outcomes framework development. It was quite clear at the event I was at last week how the WEA were almost apologetic to the students who were there, saying, there is a reason why we ask you when you're doing your English for a second language, why is one of the questions in there doing their feedback, they ask, are you less likely to know, or how many times have you used the doctor? And the time and time again, by improving opportunities around education, and then by the time about referring the chances that people get into employment, community learning can help, my other profession, the NHS, because people are less likely to miss appointments simply because they can read the letters they are now sent from the NHS. And so I know that's what you're planning in terms of community learning. Absolutely. They're already embracing that. But let's put this down to the more established learners. What are they doing in terms of delivering the courses, but also how can they demonstrate that whoever they are, their students, how things are also improving with the very important aspects of social benefit, not just about the academic achievements, but, well-being, mental health, physical health, all those other factors. So I'm absolutely determined to see that come through as part of the combined authority. And dare I say it, if we're not doing it, we should be showing leadership across all combined authorities about our absolute focus on public health, prevention, and how education helps. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Claire will talk about going forward about the way that we're looking at the skills system as a holistic view around the person. And you know, if you aren't well, or if you can't access learning, then those elements will stop you from that progression. So you know, we're working really closely on that. In terms of the question, it was around about 10% at the start, so it's doubled. And whilst it's useful to have percentages on things, I think it's really about making sure the money meets the needs. So after we've done the review, we'll bring it back to committee for a discussion around, you know, what we find, and if we find that we need to spend more, then we can ask for that approval.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies again for missing the first informal meeting, Affairs of State, don't you know? These things overtook me, I'm afraid. Anyway, that aside, I've heard the vote, and I was particularly picked up on the Mayor's question, which I thought was very insightful. Community learning, I've heard that phrase a number of times in this Q&A. I represent a very large rural ward north of Peterborough City in North West Cambs constituency. How are we reaching out to those rural communities in this community learning, in parenthesis, the more mature audiences, certainly with regard, just picking up on the Mayor again, mental health, physical health, education. It isn't just about urban areas, of course not, because this is the combined authority and it covers Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. I get that. But how are we specifically targeting, if indeed we are, the more rural communities? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's several ways. So our providers, our local authority adult education providers hold the lion's share of the funding around community learning. So they have access to all of the intelligence from their local authority colleagues. So they work closely with them and they plan their curriculum around rural areas. But again, that's why I want to get into the data and have a look at how well we are doing that so that I can answer that question more fully. In terms of moving forward, the Cambridge Community Foundation, which we're funding through the Innovation Fund, is working with very small voluntary and community sector organisations to engage with people that, you know, we cannot engage with. So that work, as we evaluate the work that is taking place there, we should be able to get some more intelligence and then direct the funding towards the organisations that can reach the people that we can't reach through maybe some more formal organisations.
If I might just have a very brief follow-up, Chair. Great. There are particularly effective avenues which you may or may not consider, which are things like patently parish councils, community associations, village hall associations, community magazines. Well, my own area, in fact, the whole of north of Peterborough, is represented by a publication called the Village Tribune, which goes into something like 8,000 letterboxes, particularly in the rural areas. It may be well worth considering, and I can give you the details of the editor most certainly. Very, very cheap to advertise in real terms, and a quality publication, which I know is very popular. So, you know, this could be an easy win to get into the houses, the households of the particular audience that I'm referring to. So thank you. If you'd like the information, I'd be very happy to give it to you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, yes, I would. That's a really good point, and I'll certainly pass it on to our providers. But we also do internal communications, so I think that would be a really good way forward. Thank you.
Claire, do you want to come back on that?
Just very briefly, I think about a month ago, I met Mayor Nick introduced us to Cambridgeshire Acre to look at the whole kind of village hall thing. So there's an early conversation there, but there's clearly, when we were talking, we knew there was a synergy here which we needed to kind of think about. So that was the first thing. Said what it looks like, I don't know yet, but that connection's made, and any more would be really, really useful. I think the other thing just to say is, and in a way it goes back to the early conversation at the informal skills about FE and learning provision, that going forward, what does it look like in terms of post 16 and the digital and the college learning? But in this instance, all our instinct is that the learning has to be right in the community, because we're talking about people who are so disengaged that we just need to do it in a way which is the least is the easiest way for people to make that what could be a really massive leap between not being engaged and engaged. So really at the roots of communities, and anybody that's got links into organisations like Acre or others where we can make those contacts. Yes, please.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jackie, for what has been a very thorough introduction to this paper, and then a very, very thorough question and answer session. And I have to say, not everybody gets grilled in quite the same way that you have been, but I think it's a reflection of just how much the committee are involved and engaged with this, and that they have all read the papers in advance and are very much focused on the work that you're doing. So, coming to the recommendations, recommendation A is to note, so we don't need to vote on that one, but recommendations B and C do actually approve changes to our current arrangements and delegation of authority, so we do need to vote on those. I'm happy to propose them. Can I have a seconder for the recommendations? Thank you, Sam Wakeford. And all those in favour of those recommendations, if you could indicate now, that would be great. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. I'm not sure you do get a vote, Charlotte, but I'm very glad that you're supportive all the same. So, thank you. Thank you very much, Jackie. I'm afraid you did get a fair grilling on that for your first one, but it was brilliant. Thank you so much. Right, we move on to the Careers Hub, which is Laura. Very accustomed to being grilled by this committee, I'm afraid, Laura. Can I just say, I think our cameras, screens have gone off, but the live stream is still okay, and I don't think we need them within the room, so it's fine. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and morning again, members. I think I know most of you, but by way of an introduction, my name's Laura Geimer. I am our Strategic Careers Hub lead, and I work within the skills team. Just want to give you a very brief overview of agenda item number 6, which is our Careers Hub funding for the academic year 24-25. Purpose of this paper really is to allow members of the committee to note the anticipated funding from the Careers and Enterprise Company, and that we do have a planned paper to go to Combined Authority Board. What we will be asking Combined Authority Board to do is to accept our funding offer from the Careers and Enterprise Company and to allocate match funding, to accept future grant funding that we may get from the Careers and Enterprise Company in addition to our core funding up to the value of £150,000, which will be generally tendered for and aligned to our strategic priorities, and also to delegate authority to the Interim Director of Skills in consultation with the Chief Finance Officer and the Monitoring Officer to enter into contracts and grant funding agreements where necessary. And then just really as headline information, grant funding is expected to be in a region of around £310,000, and then our match funding in the region of £130,000 for academic 24-25. You'll see from the paper that we are currently seeking this internal match funding, and I think it's just unfortunate in terms of the sequential events and how we have to align up for timescales for the start of the academic year that we don't sort of have all of our ducks in a row at the moment. So we've got things happening concurrently. But the intention really of this paper was to allow you sight of it and to allow any questions or comments from committee prior to us going to Combined Authority Board. And I think it's probably just important to sort of say that this funding really is for the continuation of delivery of the Careers Hub, that it is, our Careers Hub is now in-house. So since the 1st of January This year, when the GrowthWorks service ceased as an external delivery arm, we now have the members of personnel in-house with an agreement with Form the Future for 1.5 full-time equivalents to deliver the service. And the mood music we're getting from the Careers and Enterprise Company at the moment is they are looking at more of a co-designed grant offer for this academic year for the mayoral combined authorities. So we are hoping to have a little more flex and a little more movement in this area. And I suppose really the only other thing I've got to say to this is I see careers education as really that preventative cornerstone, preventative in terms of accessing wider services we need them, and playing to the Mayor's point around good health outcomes. If we can have young people making informed decisions going into careers rather than into jobs, we prevent further need and reliance on the system. But that's all I have to say at the moment, but very happy to take questions or any comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Sam.
Thank you very much indeed. That all sounds helpful. Just on one specific, if I may, 3.5 for noting, there's the context about the legacy of the GrowthWorks contract around delivery of the Careers Hub. Does that mean that currently the service is only being provided in City, South Cambs and East Cambs, and that there's a gap in the north? That didn't accord with my understanding. No, grateful if you can clarify.
Just to clarify that point, we have, when the service was out in GrowthWorks, they had 3 members of staff immediately within their team and 1.5 which serviced Cambs, South Cambs, sat within Form the Future. When we've TUPE'd in-house, everything bar Cambs and South Cambs has come in-house. So we have in-house delivery for the rest of the region and a contract with Form the Future to deliver Cambs, South Cambs. And the rationale around Form the Future delivering that Cambs, South Cambs piece is the footprint they have within the careers space. And I don't think we would be doing justice to the service to cut them out. What they offer in terms of value add to the Careers Hub offer is it goes absolutely hand in hand, and it avoids any duplication of GCP funding by retaining that partnership and that relationship at the moment.
Just to say thank you. I'm entirely reassured on that point. Then thank you very much for clarifying.
I'm going to ask a question, which is that you mentioned that this was about preventing young people from ending up not in the places that they wanted to be. I think there's an increasing recognition that careers advice is not just for young people in the current employment environment, and the need to upskill people who have been out of employment for a while or who could potentially move and be more effective and productive than they are being. So is this currently just focused on young people, or is it work that applies across the whole age range?
Really good point. So in terms of this paper, this is specifically for the Careers and Enterprise Company and our work with young people. I think what's worth sort of mentioning, so wider committee may or may not be aware of this, from a central government point, there are 2 main funding streams for careers education. We have the National Careers Service, which services those 13 into adulthood. And then we have the Careers and Enterprise Company that works directly with schools. As a combined authority, we've used some of our UK SPF money to launch what we're terming our all-age careers service. Now, tempering that with the reality of what we can actually do with the funding, because it's not a huge amount of money, allows us to start driving direction of that adult space. I think it's also interesting to look to certainly the Trailblazer deals that have been done in other MCAs, but to the level 4 devolution that's on offer, and that actually allows more authority over the National Careers Service contract. And I think as we look towards changes in governments, there will probably be more alignment between those 2 lines. So nationally and centrally, government are looking at a more all-age careers service. We're certainly looking at that at a local level. And I think careers is a really interesting place where we will start to see more autonomy coming in at an MCA level, and I think it's absolutely necessary for us to be able to do that regional flavouring and actually having an impact of what we're doing. But all age careers is our watch this space, I suppose I'm saying.
Thank you. Or to put it an alternative way, which you can't say and I can, we're not allowed to do that because central government doesn't let us, but we all agree it's really important. It's useful to be clear about that, and it is actually really reassuring to hear that actually the combined authority, with the relatively small bits of money that it has available, is pushing in that direction. And I think it is a really important area that for us to be making sure is being looked at, and ideally making sure that actually it's not kind of in a completely separate space, because people don't suddenly careers advice isn't completely different depending on whether you're 17 or whether you're 20. Although clearly the funding for it is. Eileen.
Thank you. I'm just very interested in what the outcomes are of this intervention. Will there be evaluation? Because one of the things that I realised when I was on the Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly, and I used to be on the skills subcommittee, is the need to actually open people's eyes to apprenticeships. And I know that Form the Future were doing quite a lot of work in that area. And I'm just wondering whether we do have some sort of destination evaluation of what happens after the end of intervention of the Strategic Careers Hub.
Thank you. So outcomes are, it's a difficult measure. In the paper, I state that we will be reporting back on performance later on in this year. So our contracting with the Careers and Enterprise Company is to work directly with senior leaders and careers leaders within schools to make sure that they are delivering the appropriate. So we don't have that direct relationship with young people. We monitor this through the Gatsby benchmarks, and we've seen continuous positive progression through those Gatsby benchmarks across all of our schools in the region, which has increased year on year. Destination evaluation is really, really complicated and isn't something we have at an individual level. It is monitored through our local authorities to a certain point, and it's also monitored through whether people go into higher education apprenticeships. So there is monitoring at various points. What we do though, one of our priority areas is around apprenticeship and technical education, and it's around making sure that there is it's a push-pull thing, that there is more in terms of the supply, so how we can influence employers to be offering more, and how can we influence providers to be on patch and delivering more, but also informing young people of what those opportunities are, informing parents of what those opportunities are, so that we can remove bias, we can remove stereotypes. And will there ever be parity between technical and academic education? Probably not, but we can start to influence the importance of why somebody would be doing technical skills, and making sure that it is seen and held in a higher esteem. So we absolutely do work in that space.
I just want to add, I think there is actually a really interesting transition going on about the value of technical versus academic education. Certainly the parents and young people I talk to have a completely different attitude towards apprenticeships these days than they did about 5 or 6 years ago. And some of that is to do with the costs of being a student and the benefits of being a student. And I think there's a very different conversation happening about it. Sorry to interrupt.
Not interrupting. And actually, I think the way in which we buy education has changed. So with there is so much going on that it's fast. I could talk about it forever. I'm going to stop. But I do think it is a fascinating place to be.
Absolutely. James.
I went up to Chatteris to see the opening of the new training school up there, technical training school, and if we had those all over our area, we'd end up with more technical people who could go into industry and to work And I thought that was a fabulous step forward, which we should try and put more of those into the whole of our area.
I couldn't agree more. It's an amazing facility. But actually, and it's interesting that there are other facilities like it around that aren't necessarily. I mean, say the other one that I know about is in Cambridge, and it's but it's run by marshals rather than by the combined authority. But it services not just their apprentices, but apprentices from a number of other local industries, and growing that. Those type of spaces is really, really important. But clearly there's a lot more work to be done because it's happening in one or two kind of key industries. It could be happening in an awful lot more of them than it is, and we need to work out how we expand that. We've got quite a long way from the careers hub. I'm really sorry. Are there any more questions on this report? I don't think so. Thank you very much indeed, Laura. This report is just for noting, but as you can tell, there's a lot of interest in it. So thank you very much. We will go on to the Adult Education Budget Audit and Assurance Update, which is Janet. Janet, I think this might be your first attendance at this committee, but Claire tells me you are a regular attender at the Audit Committee. But for members of this committee, this is Janet Warren, who is going to introduce the Adult Education Audit and Assurance Update. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. As Chair has said, my name's Janet, Lead Commissioner working on the Adult Education Budget, and thank you for having me here today. The purpose of the report really was for your information and to ensure that you're cited on some of the audit and assurance process for some of our skills funding streams. The usual process for reporting audit and updates and results is through the Audit and Governance Committee, which allows for scrutiny of the work and ensures governance is completed. The combined authority has been responsible for delivery of adult skills since devolution of the adult education budget on the 1st of August 2019 and since 2022, with a recurring budget of around £12 million. And since 2022, we've received by delegation the Level 3 free courses for jobs funding with a financial year budget of around £800,000. The combined authority is required by the Department for Education to demonstrate that appropriate controls are in place around the funding which it receives from government, which is being spent by our learning organisations for the benefit of residents in our region. As part of this, the combined authority places reliance on the annual funding assurance work, which is undertaken by independent audit firms, where sampling and testing is completed to reach an opinion over use of funds, which the provider has claimed and received from the combined authority over the course of that academic year. We continue to fund two types of learning organisations, both grant-funded, local authorities and further education colleges, and our procured independent training providers. Our annual assurance approach helps us to ensure the best possible skills outcomes for our residents, local employers, and ensure value for money for taxpayers. We are acutely aware of the importance of managing public money appropriately. The report which you've seen is in reference specifically to the last academic year, which started on the 1st of August 2022 and ended on the 31st of July 2023. Testing was based on a standardised funding assurance approach where we sampled both AEB and free courses for jobs funding streams in order to provide a conclusion and to be able to report back to the Department for Education as is required of us as part of devolution. And in the future, as more funding is devolved and delegated from central government, the combined authority will be required to expand this assurance work. During that period, as you would have read in the report, 5 of our AEB providers had been selected to receive the funding assurance visit. I'm happy to report all visits concluded within the planned timeframe, and we have reviewed the results to inform any next steps as appropriate. Looking ahead to the audit plan for the current academic year, using a risk-based approach, we will select and identify providers who will receive an assurance visit, and they will be notified in writing in due course. Audits are planned to conclude within the current academic year so that any funding errors can be corrected within the year and any funding returned to the combined authority. Our wider assurance approach also includes internal controls such as performance management and quality assurance visits, and we continue to work closely with Ofsted, ESFA and the other combined authorities to share intelligence and inform compliance as a sector. Thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Janet. Any questions for Janet on this one? Sam, and then go on, Sam.
Thanks. I'm conscious of the context of the public meeting, but presumably there's further work around supporting the provider number one in terms of the continuous improvement cycle, given the larger error rate. But possibly I'd ask about that offline. But I'm assuming that we act on that.
Yes, absolutely. So happy to report that provider one, the errors identified were worked through with that particular provider. And all of the information was updated within the academic year on the ILR, which is the data record. So that's a clean year in terms of the ILR. But yes, management points are picked up and discussed with each provider.
Thank you.
If I Sorry. So you are actually able to assure us already that there aren't sort of wider structural concerns there, and that those issues have been picked up with the provider, and we don't have concerns about continuing to work with them.
Happy to say that we don't have concerns, and that we are picking up in conversation with the provider.
Thank you, Peter.
Can I assume that's the same with provider number 6, who was retested?
Yes, thank you for highlighting that visit. So that wasn't a assurance visit as such. It was a smaller test on a specific sample of funding, and it was split over 2 years in a response to the previous academic year's test. So in the report, it sort of sets out that although in the previous academic year there was a significant error rate, it's been retested. And there are no concerns.
If I might, Chair, I absolutely agree with Sam. This perhaps is best discussed offline, given this is a public meeting. But you've got 100,000 or virtually 100,000 pounds worth of funding. Your comment here, or the comment, is funds to be recovered if not corrected. It's been corrected, so you haven't recovered those funds. Is that how I'm interpreting that?
So, yes, I mean, the £100,000 there has been recovered from the previous academic year, that there were no funds to be collected from the current year, which, it was quite a specific test, but I sort of included that so that you had full oversight of what had happened last year.
Thank you. It's a very interesting paper, and my question really is around, I think it is the first time that this has come to this committee, and I think it's quite important for us that it does, because I think it's probably going to get more scrutiny here than it may do at the audit committee, because this committee is particularly engaged with whether our providers are providing, kind of doing their work well, because it's not just for us about whether the money is being correctly audited, but actually whether they're fulfilling the role that they're supposed to be fulfilling, and clearly there have been issues in the past. So I'm just wondering, is this whole process relatively new, or is it just that it's always gone to the audit committee only and not come to this committee before?
Apologies. We've completed annual assurance since the second year of devolution. We were part of what's called the first year offer from ESFA, where they took a small sample of our provider base in the first year of devolution. So we've been doing that on an annual basis since 21-22.
Thank you. It's good to know it's been happening. It's also really useful for us to be able to see it. So thank you. Nick?
Yeah, echo all that. It's good good that it's coming to here, more clarity, more scrutiny from those who are obviously very interested in it, the people around the table. I guess my question is there are 24 providers, and in the 22 to 23 year, you tested 5. I guess the question is if the cycle of doing that, or when an independent training provider or indeed an FE college is going to get the call, a bit like any inspection, be it a CQC in healthcare or a school educational establishment, is the frequency, if you break that down, possibly of a 1 in 4 years, 1 in 5 years, is that sufficient, or is there an expectation at a sort of national level as to how quickly? I mean, we don't want to make audits, to make it more difficult for people to, take them away from doing the job that they want to do, but at the same time, you want to keep them up to date and make sure that people are, reporting back their successes or indeed their troubles. So it's a question on the frequency. Do we need to be putting more resource this way, or would that be more troublesome?
Thank you for that question. It's a really good point that you make, Mayor, and I sort of touched on it in the report that going forwards we intend to implement a framework around assurance. Chair, as you've highlighted, it is sort of the very interesting and important other side of skills. So it sort of underpins everything in a safe and structural way. So in terms of the framework that I would like to implement, it's really around things like frequency and what it means when, a provider has had a 0% error rate. That's good. And they wouldn't necessarily need to be audited again, certainly not in the next year, but setting out what that means for the providers, and if a provider did go over the 5% tolerance, what it would mean for them in terms of potentially needing another visit in the next year, so that we can help them to understand what's expected and work on their management points with them, and to ensure the effective delivery of skills in our region.
Thank you. Claire, I think you wanted to comment.
Yeah, it was just one thing on that, because, to Mayor Nick's point, the stewardship of public money is absolutely critical here. I think the one thing just to say, and this in no way detracts from that, because our settlements are very low compared to most mayoral combined authorities, when we say there's a percentage for management costs, it's very low for us compared to others. And Janet and others in the team nonetheless still have to do the same processes to the same levels of governments of West Midlands or Manchester. So it's really, really interesting to try and balance using the funding to use on learning and also on the management costs. So that's why the risk-based approach, I think, in terms of trying to really think, sensibly, proportionately, where do we need to focus to try and drive quality? Otherwise, we're spending more and more of our money on the management than on the learning, and as we know, it's a smallish amount of it.
Thank you. Really helpful. Again, I think this paper was to note. I think we have noted it quite significantly. Lots of interest. Thank you very much, Janet, and we'll look forward to having you back again sometime in the future. So thank you. We will now move on to the Employment and Skills Board update, which is Liz, I think. And this is verbal. Welcome.
Here we go. Good afternoon, members. We're now into the afternoon, so thank you, Chair. So, I'm here this afternoon just to provide an update from the February Employment and Skills Board, which we feed into Skills Committee from. During February Employment and Skills Board, we successfully appointed a new chair who is with us today, which is Charlotte Horobin, obviously CEO of our local chamber. That was following the update from the last update that I gave during Skills Committee, where Vic Annals, a previous chair, had stepped down. So we have now appointed chair, and that's, we feel, a very positive appointment and well received across the board. Really looking forward to working closely with Charlotte going forwards. So during last ESB, we received an update from Adeline, who you heard from earlier, talking about the LSIP. We, during that update, spoke quite heavily on ensuring visibility of the skills gaps, visibility of provision gaps, with a continued focus of that regional leadership on building the sector pipelines that Claire has presented previously at Skills Committee, that we're continuing a number of pieces of work on. And with that sector pipeline work, there was discussion during the LSIP presentation during ESB around the key sectors, some of those of which were highlighted earlier, so life sciences, and also our enabling sectors such as construction and the work that we can be doing within those. And we heard earlier as well about the significant sort of cross-cutting themes within the LSIP and around the work that we are focusing on, to include those green skills themes coming up and the digitalization running through each of those sectors as well. We also spoke about the Good Work Charter during Employment and Skills Board. So board members were asked for their thoughts on the Good Work Charter. Claire obviously presented an update earlier just to give an overview of what the types of things we might look to include within that Good Work Charter. And we also looked at the views on the branding. It's quite important, we feel. And again, Claire may have alluded to this earlier, the Good Work Charter, we want that to align to mayoral ambition. So creating a fairer, healthier sub-region for all, but also with our economic growth strategy and ambitions within that. So facilitating inclusive growth, which was a theme that we spoke about during the February ESB and also during the December ESB as well. One of the other key focuses that we looked at during February Employment and Skills Board was internships. So this is something that we're looking at through our Shared Prosperity Fund, SPF funding, and this was actually a really successful initiative during the Community Renewal Fund last year, where we ran an internship initiative alongside GrowthWorks at the time, and 70% of the people that actually participated in that internship scheme were then offered employment with the employer who they had done their internship with. So this is something that we're really keen to work on during SPF funding. So as I say, something we discussed about during the Employment and Skills Board. Themes that came from that was ensuring, obviously, engaging with employers and the importance of that. Without the employers, we can't run internships. But within that, looking at, again, engaging with employers on how best to support inclusive recruitment, which is something, again, we were talking about during the last session, and how we can help develop processes around that, particularly with those with disabilities or long-term health issues. Alongside that, within the internship discussion and presentation, we had a focus on ensuring we're reaching out and reaching individuals from less advantaged backgrounds. But that's another theme within the inclusive recruitment side of things, to make sure that internship offer is available to all. And across the board, board members were very supportive in the networking and facilitation of that, and also the promotion of that piece of work as well. So really, what I wanted to say in summary is we had really positive discussions about the work charter, of which you heard the update earlier, very positive discussions around the continued development of LSIP and the partnership with the Chamber on that, alongside the internships as well. And those discussions are helping to then inform what we bring to you at the Skills Committee. And that was all from me, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Liz. A very, very positive report. And I want to echo what you say about how excellent it is having Charlotte, who's now chairing that and now a member of this committee formally, which is brilliant news. Any questions for Liz on that one, or comments? I'm just going to say very quickly, I have already had reassurance on this because I whispered to Claire, but just to be clear that I think it's really important. The internship programme sounds fantastic and a 70% conversion rate is amazing. I think it's really important that we're clear that those are paid internships and we're not expecting people to work for nothing. But it is a really, really good route into kind of getting to know an employer and the employer getting to know you. So it's a as long as they're paid, that's fantastic. So thank you. Thank you very much. You've got off very lightly. And I think finally we're coming to Bruno. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you. Nice to see you all again. Good afternoon. As you know, I'm Bruna, the finance manager, so I'm here to speak with you about the performance for the last 6 months, for the year up to the January, so the last 9 months for the program. So we are moving roughly in the same direction as we've done throughout the whole year. Our income is going slightly down as a forecast. So originally, last time we met, we were speaking about 15.6 million. Now we are going back to 15 million only. The difference again is our friend Bootcamp Way 4 or another of the Bootcamp family. But anyway, this is very much the important part about income. The other thing about income to mention is that within the money we got already from the FE for Bootcamp Way 4, there will be some of it that will not be used for Bootcamp Way 4 because we got some in advance. So what we are going to do is use these for Bootcamp Way 5. This is £200,000 or so, which is all agreed with the FE, so everything is fine. We haven't managed to spend them all, and we will not spend it by the end of the program. In relation to cost, our cost is forecasted now to be 4.7 million. Of course, the majority of our slippage, the forecast is lower than actual of 4.7, than budget of 4.7 million. Again, the slippage, majority of it is the majority of the variance again is bootcamp. 3.7 million of these will not be spent, while £300,000 of it will be spent next year. Also, there is some slippage within the innovation funds for AIB that we have replanned and reshape and use it going forward in a better, more efficient way. It's fair to notice that Bootcamp is doing amazingly on delivery and quality, and underspend don't reflect the quality of what we're doing, and the FE is very pleased with what we're doing. So please don't. Let's make sure we always remember that the job that the Bootcamp team is doing is amazing, despite of how the financial look like, because it's not fair to say that they are not doing an amazing job. And this is everything I have for you now. And please, if you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. It is a story that we're fairly familiar with, and I think we've all been very aware that it's been difficult to get enough people onto the bootcamp courses, but the numbers are moving in the right direction. I hope I'm right in saying that there's a slight difference in the way that the government are funding this now, in that rather than handing the money over and then asking for it back, they're just not giving it to us until it's delivered. Am I correct about that?
Partially, yes, but not on everything. So Bootcamp Way 4 had an advance for the first part of the delivery, and then throughout the rest of it, you will claim it back in the different stages of the different milestones. So Bootcamp is divided in 3 milestones. The first one is we get money when there is an enrollment. Stage 2 is when they finish, and stage 3 is when they finish the interview. So we get money for roughly milestone 1, and then 2 and 3 we need to claim it, because we haven't really have enough numbers of people to do to complete milestone 1 within the number proposed originally by the FE. This money remain for Bootcamp 5. That's all. But that would mean that we already fully covered for the rest of milestone 2 and 3. as well as. So we
That's
don't have to
helpful. I
claim
mean, I
anything
think it's
else.
also helpful for us to understand that actually to get the full completions on these, it's not just about enrolments, it's about making sure that people complete the course and do the interview at the end of the course.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that actually for some of our providers, persuading learners not only, I mean, you hope that they complete the course, but then having to do an interview at the end of it as well, which isn't necessarily going to benefit them particularly, is quite a challenge. So as so often with these things, getting the full completion and the full delivery of it depends on ticking all the boxes that DFE set us, some of which are more beneficial than others.
It's incredibly challenging, especially to find the people that they're actually willing to interview them in the first place. So the job that Melissa and the team are doing is incredible, even on the other side, on trying to find work for them, really.
Thank you, that's really helpful clarification. Claire, do you want to come in?
Yeah,
I'm just struck as we kind of have all these conversations how interrelated everything is. So if we go back to the LSIP conversation about our links with employers, I mean, on the boot camps and all our learning, but particularly on the boot camps, my goodness me, we need employers involved, A, to kind of want the learners, and B, to engage in the system. So, you know, those connections are incredibly important. The underspend, I think, I'm looking at lists here, is broadly in line with nationally what others are doing. So we're not out on a limb in terms of the underspends. And, you know, I think just to reiterate what Bruno said, we're very high when it comes to translating these learners who do come on our opportunities into jobs. The one final point I'd say on the Innovation Fund, going back to, again, interconnections, what Jackie was talking about flexibility, I think one of the frustrations this year has been that we've known that some of these things haven't got over the line, and we've wanted to kind of in year actually repurpose the money so we could actually spend it. So one of the things that Jackie really wants to do is to make the system more agile for us, which hopefully will make it a little easier next year.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Sam, and then Peter.
Thanks. And the context around the boot camps is really important for all the reasons we've said. And have I recalled correctly as well that one of the elements of the structure is that there's still a non-trivial cost to employers in making use of the boot camps funding with their employees as well. So I don't, as we say, it's a discussion that we've had in other contexts as well. I don't immediately recall if that 3.7 million figure is one we've seen before as such, but it's of a scale that's not surprising to us. It does just make me reflect out loud on whether we have other avenues that we're not already using, or might wish to reuse the avenues we've tried in the past to feed back to central government around how adjustments to some of the structures here would let us deliver the money that they're trying to get us to spend for, you know, good outcomes that they and we share, but the barriers that are in our way, and particularly if, as Claire's reminded us, we're not even out of line nationally on this either. So that's, you know, a huge sum of money the government is trying to invest in skills which we need invested, and yet we can't deliver.
I think that's a good point on the messages going back to government about. I mean, I think some of that has been taken up, but maybe Nick can pick that one up. Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Helpfully, I'm not offering any solutions, but I'm just wondering, the term boot camp, to me, that conjures up something sort of military-esque, hard work, people being shouted at, and I mean, is it the right term that we? I mean, in our feedback to government, and it's embedded. I get that. I'm just wondering whether it is the right term for a lot of people, and their potential misunderstanding of what a boot camp that we're endeavouring to push as another local authorities and government generally is it the right term? Just throwing out there, and I say helpfully, I'm not offering any alternatives.
I don't think we have any control over that. I think it's a very good question, Bruno.
But we have feedback to government, and I'm just wondering whether that could be just thrown in as a suggestion from the idiot that represents a rural ward.
Not in any way that, Peter. I'll come to Bruno, and then if Nick wants to say anything, he can, but he doesn't. You don't have to. Bruno.
All right, fine.
Okay, you had just a couple of points. I'm not the program manager, so please, Melissa, correct me if I do anything that is incorrect, because I'm just the finance manager. So in my mind, the bootcamp is called bootcamp because they are short courses, so like short intensive courses. So I think that's where the name bootcamp come from. But again, I'm not an expert, so that's my take on it. What Sam was referring to about the payment from the employee is only if the employee decide to bring a member of their team to partake to bootcamp. So then they give some match funding to it, but not a large value. So it's not for the interview stages, it's for attending the full course, and is but still part of it is paid by DFE anyway.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. As somebody who's actually had to go on radio and try and sell a boot camp or boot camps, I would first of all, I'd say I would more than happy to continue in doing that, being a sort of figurehead, or indeed I should think, officers, lead members, so something that we should be embracing and an opportunity, be it both either on local radio, through media, or in our respective authorities. But I would agree. I think it's a bloody awful name. I'll put it on record. I think it comes with this sort of sense of short, sharp shock, and it just doesn't register with me in any meaningful way. I think the idea of nurturing, nice words, really. So funny that, compassion, cooperation and community, doing all those things. But I would echo that. And if we can feedback in some sort of way, I'd happily put my name to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yay.
Claire.
Now, I'm going to put my tin hat on as I say this, okay, because I think it might be the case, because I remember in previous jobs I've done where we've had conversations about names like this and with government in the room, that I think there is a sense for a younger generation that boot camp has got the connotation of X Factor and Britain's Got Talent and it's exciting and everybody wants to do it to get famous. So I think this might be slightly kind of, depending on, your background and your generations to what the connotations of boot camp. I have no idea because I'm firmly in the it's an army thing and, you whatever. And it sounds very male to me, bluntly. But then we all bring different things to the party when we think about names, I guess.
Well, if we were to follow that through, then who's going to be Simon Cowell? And am I the Simon Cowell of mayoral authorities?
I think I definitely need to call this to order. We've got off the topic of the finance report. So I don't think we can actually have any control over the name at this point. We can feed back to government, and Nick and I will have a conversation about that. So thank you very much, Bruna, for the report. I think there isn't anything in there that's a big surprise. There are some ongoing frustrations. So thank you very much indeed for that. And we thank you. I think final item on the agenda effectively is the agenda plan. Does anybody want to make any comments on the agenda plan? I think we did have a sort of half comment from Sam. I think it might have been I can't remember when it was, about perhaps it was part of the informal committee actually, about making sure that we have enough time to feed into the work on the charter before it comes back to the committee in June. And I think that might well mean that we need to have some capacity to see that early and feed into it. But I think there was an informal meeting discussion, but it's probably relevant to the agenda plan. So maybe we can make a note of that. I don't see any other comments coming up. In which case, thank you all very, very much for your time this morning. The date of our next meeting is Monday, the 17th of June. And thank you for what I think has been some excellent discussions. So thank you for your time.